This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, I'm going to talk about how love isn't tallying shit up. And this is important if you are a tallier. And by that, I mean somebody who's counting up the sexual encounters, counting up the chores, counting up the date nights, counting how much everybody spends, everything, right? And this really can kill your relationship, and it makes it more into a business, but like a bad business, and a business where people hate going to work. And I will talk about that in depth as soon as I tell you to subscribe. My most recent subscriber episode was why it goes so poorly to give an avoidant person a gift. And many partners have recounted this. It was something I discussed with a client, gave him a little shout out in the description because he wanted me to do a podcast about it. But every preoccupied attachment person, not every, but most of them have a lot of resentment or sadness around holidays because they don't feel close to their partner. And this is a major reason why. And we talk about it in that episode. And there's plenty of other subscriber episodes if you subscribe for $8.99 a month. I think that's a great bang for your buck. Okay, so today we're going to talk about this scorekeeping, this compulsive scorekeeping thing that now is on trend, where in fact that's the Fair Play book, and I did my podcast about the Fair Play book. You can look that one up on Spotify. I think the most of what I'm going to say here, which is if you are doing this, it turns into a business. This is no longer a relationship. If your child asks you for a hug, you do not say, I just gave you 2 hugs in the past hour and 45 minutes. So you are not, that is not fair. I have to go give your siblings hugs and I need to give myself a hug and you are asking me for too much. I mean, that sounds absurd, right? And I'm making it sound absurd because it is absurd. And if your kid says that, if you're giving out potato chips to your kids and they start counting the chips to make sure that everybody got the exact same amount of chips, that isn't parents' favorite thing, It really isn't, because it seems very selfish, right? It just seems kind of like you're not in the spirit of the occasion, or like with the birthday cake, like you got a tiny bit of a bigger piece than me. And most kids really grow out of that, but the kids that don't are the kids that are in the homes where everything is counted up. And I talked about this a lot in my previous episode, which is that idea of if you were a single parent, you would have to do everything yourself, so therefore we should split all chores and everything exactly down the middle in our marriage, which is a marriage, not being a single parent. And I think, of course, that is absurd for the reasons that I'm saying now. In a loving relationship, you are trying to give. I have a podcast episode about the 100% marriage and why 50-50 is some bullshit. And that's true. You cannot be counting stuff up. It has never, ever been good for a man to count up how much sex he's having with his wife. Never. It just makes her feel like a hooker. It's like he's doing his accounting for the month and he's like, I have spent X amount of thousands of dollars. How many sexual encounters did I get from that hooker? Is that correct? I got X amount of sexual encounters and I spent X amount of money. I guess that's accurate, and my accounts are now in balance. No, like that is not what your relationship should be like. And it's the same thing when people start going back and forth with each other about anything like that. Well, you went to the gym on Monday, so I should get to go to the gym on Tuesday, and then you should go on Wednesday, and then I should go on Thursday. Okay, in a loving relationship, people don't do things like that. Do you do things like that with your friends? No. Do you do things like that with your kids? No. Do you try to make everything exactly equal down to the ounce with any other fruitful, nice, loving relationship you have? No. Probably not. Otherwise, those relationships would go poorly as well. And maybe you say, I am like that with everyone. Now, let me tell you who gets like that with everyone, though. It's kids who never got enough. So if you were raised in a home where there was a lot of emotional or physical neglect and you never felt like you got enough love or resources or sometimes food or attention or a safe place to sleep, you can really turn into somebody who is obsessed with fairness. And that's because you didn't get treated fairly as a child. And that makes a lot of sense. And I understand that, but if you bring, and also, by the way, like goes to like. So you're going to be attracted to a similar kind of person with similar sorts of ideologies where they also likely felt that they had a deficit growing up. And I see this the most among two fearful avoidant partners, where you could listen to my podcast on fearful avoidant attachment being the one you get when your childhood is traumatic. And the reality is, if you did not feel loved as a child, or you felt like you were never able to get enough, again, love, attention, affection, etc., then you're going to be obsessed with everything being even Steven in your relationship. And it's not going to be, because that's not how relationships work. So sometimes there is no way for everybody to get exactly the same amount of birthday cake. And even if you decided to do that for your children, guess what? You're making them weird when they go out of the house, because then they're going to go to somebody's birthday party and they're going to say, no, the birthday boy got a bigger piece of cake than I did. And they're not going to be very socially adept and able to get along in the world where you need to be more flexible. And when they go play, they're always going to want to count up everybody's turn and make sure that everybody gets to go first, the exact, same amount. And that too is thought of as rigid, inflexible, and really off-putting. So you don't want to do this in your home, and you don't want to model it for your children. You don't want to say things like, well, you picked the movie yesterday, so I get to pick the movie today, and then you get to pick it tomorrow, and then blah, 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 blah. What about you just try to talk, without the scorekeeping, without the record, as though it were Groundhog Day. You didn't even remember who picked which movie, and you both decide on a movie that you could both get behind. When you can have conversations that don't come from a place where fairness, exact fairness is the point, then you can learn new things about each other. You can be curious. You could say, oh, why do you want to watch that movie? Or like, for example, let's say somebody wants to watch a reality show. The partner really doesn't like reality shows because apparently they haven't listened to my podcast on why you should watch reality shows, which you could also look up on my Spotify in the search bar. But let's say that they like reality shows, right? I've had people tell me in session that the reason they like reality TV is because they grew up in a dysfunctional home, and it was kind of a way that they learned how to be, quote, normal, is by watching The Bachelor and things like that, and seeing how people talk and how people even relate to their parents on the hometown visit and things like that. And I'll tell you, if you tell that to your partner, that opens up a discussion and they've learned something about you. They're probably a lot more likely to watch reality shows. Or there's so many people who are very anxious, who like to watch the same reruns over and over. And that's kind of a way of soothing their anxiety, but their spouse has no idea that that's the case. So they're not going to sit with that person and watch it. Whereas if you know that somebody's getting a lot of, comfort from it, then you might. Basically, this is to say that there is no decision that could not benefit from some happy, benign, positive curiosity and talking, and just, not over the top. Everything doesn't have to be beaten to death. But if you find yourself saying to somebody, well, you did 1 hour of vacuuming today, but I did 1.5 hours of laundry, so therefore I feel unprioritized, go a little bit deeper, go and tell yourself, ask yourself, why am I getting so upset about this in specific? I promise you, it is not exactly because of that. Because then you know what that person says, of course, is, well, I did 2 hours of something last week. And then you get so flustered that you say, well, 5 weeks ago, I did this thing for 3 hours. And basically, in most homes, everybody's doing something. And so you can't, unless, again, you are in a situation where somebody is really using a substance, they are completely MIA, they are depressed and in bed all the time, they are completely non-functional, they're addicted, they are so anxious that they can't leave the house, whatever it is. In those cases, you got to get your partner into therapy, you got to get them to see a psychiatrist, whatever the case may be, because they're really, really struggling as though they were ill, as though they had cancer. The same sort of, effort that you would bring to treating their cancer, you need to bring to getting them into treatment for their substance abuse, for their depression, whatever it is. But in households where nobody is suffering from severe mental illness or physical illness, both people are usually doing something, during a day. So the reason that people are counting up little bits of time here and there, it's never about the little bits of time. I always use the example. There's women who are happily married that have deployed husbands, and women who are unhappily married that have deployed husbands. I used to work at a VA, as I talk about kind of frequently in here, and there's all sorts of marriages, and none of those men are doing any housework, right? There are men who are happily married to women who are in a wheelchair and cannot do anything in the home at all, right? And they do everything, and they're happily married. Why? Tell me why. If you're a Dr. Psych Mom Show listener, you know why. Because they are in a loving marriage where somebody is appreciative and affectionate and recognizes what they are doing. So the women who are unhappily married, whose husbands are deployed, are the ones who don't feel recognized and appreciated. And the ones who are happily married have the husband say, I couldn't be doing this without you, and you're so amazing, the kids are so lucky to have you, blah, blah, blah. Right? So it's really not about who's doing what in the home, because a lot of stuff can be outsourced. That's reality. And a lot of stuff doesn't have to be done. And the basic stuff that does have to be done, if your partner was ill, you would just do it. So it usually is not about this exact, bean counting, penny pinching way of looking at things. Instead, it is usually about the unaddressed attachment issues in the relationship where one person does not feel loved, the preoccupied attachment partner, and the other person feels constantly controlled and stifled, and that's the avoidant partner. And if you get into couples therapy and address these deeper issues with the dynamic and all of the resentment and the bitterness, then nobody's going to be bean counting. Truly it happens. Like, people come in, they're talking so much about chores, and then they stop talking about chores when we start talking about deeper stuff. It's like magic, like you don't ever have to talk about vacuuming again if you're addressing that people do not feel loved or valued. The vacuuming is a proxy variable. Very quickly, you got two intelligent people. People that come into therapy are not stupid, right? They're people who can figure out how to get into therapy, how to be verbal enough to get something out of therapy. If they hate vacuuming that much, they outsource the vacuuming, or one of them just does the vacuuming after a while of talking about it. When they realize that it isn't about the vacuuming, then doing the vacuuming does not feel like a loss anymore, like somebody's getting one over on you. It's just some shit that you do. It's so funny, to think about the differences in how household chores are thought about. For example, a couple that has no kids can fight about the chores as much as a couple that has 10 kids. How's that even possible? There's how many more chores? A million more chores in the couple who has 10 kids? I don't see people who have 10 kids. I see maybe people who have 4 or 5 kids at the max. So I won't talk about the people with 10 kids because I'm sure they have systems that I don't even know about. But the reality is let's say even just a couple with 1 kid versus 2 kids. As anybody with 2 kids knows, that's about 1 million times more shit to do. And yet, a couple with no kids who is unhappy and who's feeling disconnected and who has attachment issues can fight about chores as much as people with multiple children, or people with one kid can fight as much as people with two kids. And objectively, a video camera would show increasing amounts of chores, but yet you can fight about anything. If you do not feel loved and you don't feel connected, you can fight over the 1 hour of chores that you have per day as violently as you could fight over the 10 hours of chores that you have per day, and you feel that it's about the chores until you sit down with somebody and really talk about the deeper issues. What did you see growing up? What are your fears? This idea of being taken advantage of, where does it come from? This competitive vibe, where did that emanate from? Do you feel loved and like you have a comforting a source of safety and love in your partner? Why not? This is not about chores, I promise. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this. It is a topic I'm passionate about, and I will talk to y'all soon. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.